today's session. I'm just pasting the details into the chat now of how you can do that. So checking into the Reactor events gives you access to any resources and additional information we have on this session, but also similar sessions relating to the same topic that are running out of other Reactor locations too. So you can access all of that when you check in, and the details are just in the chat. So before we get started, I would just like to run through our code of conduct very briefly. So our code of conduct is something that we display at all Reactor events that we run, and it's just really a reminder to everyone to be aware of one another. It's a very inclusive environment that we have and very friendly, so just to really keep that in mind throughout, be welcoming and respectful. And if we do see an understanding, if we do see any differences of opinions throughout, just to be understanding of those differences, whether that's through the chat or any live Q&A that we have as well. So this session will run over the next 60 minutes, and it is being recorded, so hopefully you'll get that pop-up on the top of your screen to see that. And we make all of these sessions available to watch on demand. So it will go onto the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel hopefully by the end of this week, and so I'll paste a link into that YouTube channel in the chat, and that's where you can access it shortly. While you are muted today, do feel free to engage in any questions that you have, any comments and feedback that you have as well. Throughout the session, I'll be moderating the chat, so feel free to just post in there as you wish as well. So today's session is Microsoft Teams App Management Fundamentals, and is being delivered by Chris Hoard. So we're delighted to be welcoming back Chris again, who is a MVP. So Chris, without further ado, I will hand over to you to get us started.
Thank you very much, Emma, and really delighted to be back here at the Reactor. I've been speaking at the Reactor for some time now, and I look forward to kind of being back throughout the year. I'm a big believer that from working in teams every day to come and share knowledge, and it's a great opportunity in the Reactor to do that. So today we're talking about Microsoft Teams App Management Fundamentals. It's all about the basics of managing apps within Microsoft Teams. So just going to shoot through the code of conduct because Emma's already covered that. What you can expect from this session, we're going to break it down into 3 parts. First of all, we're going to talk about why app management is important. It's really, I think, important to set the scene and understand where we're going with apps within Microsoft Teams, because it's a big part of where we're heading, and you're going to see that at Microsoft Build this afternoon. So I hope that you've all registered for that. There's a lot of big news. Secondly, we're going to look at how we manage apps within Microsoft Teams currently. What tools do we have, and how do we configure them, and how do we understand that? Because once we begin to understand these basics, it's really going to sit at the center of our management strategy with Microsoft Teams. Last of all is some more considerations, what I would call wider considerations and resources. So I don't want you to think that everything is in this session today. Is very much for you to begin to think about those considerations and take them on board, because once we've looked at the basics today, there are some wider concerns, things that we must, as administrators, keep in our mind and take a look into and apply to our environments. The outcome of this, so for this session, is for you to have an understanding of those basics, to go on and maybe apply them within your own environment. So I hope this is really a cause for you to think. If not, if it's kind of information that you already know, then hopefully this will be a good consolidation and confirmation that you're on the right track. So it's a level 200 intermediate session because it kind of presupposes that you have an understanding already of Microsoft Teams and what it is. The scope will focus purely on the Teams application workload. So we're not going to kind of dive into other parts such as chat or meetings, for example. It's purely about the management of those applications and the tools that we have to do that. A quick caveat, as we put on all our Teams talks when we come to the reactor, is that Microsoft Teams is rapidly changing. So you're going to see a lot of announcements over the next couple of days of build. You'll see even more at Microsoft Inspire and at Ignite throughout the course of the year. We know that Teams is rapidly changing. So some screenshots might have already changed, but generally speaking, this will be valid for about 4 to 6 weeks. That's normally what we put the shelf life for these talks on. And what's also important is that after today, you can go on and do some more learning as well. We don't want to have this as an isolated kind of learning session. So you'll see down the bottom on the right hand side, there is a link to Microsoft Learn. You can take a quick screenshot now. It will come up again when we refer back to this at the end of the session. So you can go on, take your learning with you, and go and learn more about how to manage applications. So let's get things underway. We're not going to kind of dive straight in. We're going to be looking, as said, at the why, and that really begins with understanding the success of Microsoft Teams. I mean, I'm sure you've already know to an extent how successful Teams is. It's the fastest growing app in Microsoft history. And look at the numbers here, you know, the daily active users. That's really a barometer of how popular Teams is. But if we set that over time, it shows you the exponential growth of Microsoft Teams. Now, on the last earnings call, we found out that daily active users has gone up to 145 million. That's a lot, especially when we consider that in July 2019, not less than 2 years ago, when it overtook Slack, that was announced at Microsoft Inspire in Vegas, it was 13 million daily active users. And you can see that as we get on later in 2019, before the kind of pandemic was announced with COVID-19, that was a conservative rise that went up to 20 million. And then look what happened over the course of 2020. 44 million, 75, 115, and now we're up to 145 million. So that's roughly somewhere in the region of 50 to 60% of Microsoft 365 numbers. That's a huge jump. Now, over that period of time, indeed, Teams is a little bit over 4 years old now. It's picked up many accolades, 2 Best in Show at Enterprise Connect. There's probably going to pick up a 3rd later this year. It's been the leader in UCAS and meetings with Gartner for some time. It's overtaken Slack a long time ago now, really, in the IT world. And it's very much closing in on Zoom. So, you know, we're all on that journey along with Microsoft. Now, the reasons for why that has rocketed up, it's not just one singular reason, it's really several reasons. The first, as said, was with remote working, that the impact of COVID has changed our lives, it's changed the way we work. Businesses needed a continuity plan as they moved their workers remote, and that centered around applications such as Microsoft Teams, which facilitated them to do that. I mean, Zoom as well, and other remote working applications. But in the Microsoft world, Teams has really kind of shone and come to the fore. It's really helped a lot of businesses for people to keep in touch and continue their work during the pandemic at home. Secondly, there's been a lot of innovations within Microsoft Teams. So I think there was an article recently where Tony Redmond and Rish Tandon got together. I'm sure you all know Tony. He's very big in the Microsoft Teams and the IT world. Rish Tandon is the CVP of engineering for Microsoft Teams. And I think it was confirmed in that there's been over 300 ads alone, functionality ads, in the past year with Microsoft Teams. When we think about some of those things, we think about all of the meeting innovations, such as the custom backgrounds or the together mode or the new participant report. Microsoft want to be able to give the organizations and users who are using Microsoft Teams the best tools to operate in the new working environment. Indeed, they're continuing to push. The cadence is very rapid. Even when we go back to kind of working in this new hybrid world, they've confirmed they're still going to innovate in order to push that functionality. So there's been lots of innovations. People have been getting what they want with Microsoft Teams. Thirdly, Microsoft Teams resonates and simplifies with organizations. So I know from personal experience of doing demonstrations of Microsoft Teams to partners and customers, it very much resonates in what they're trying to do, is bringing together the means to be able to communicate and bringing together the applications that they use. It's really the natural progression over the last 10 years. If we think back and we think of OCS and we think of Link and we think of Skype, we now have Microsoft Teams, and that's bringing together everything that we do. And that resonates really well because it's better for organizations, for its users, it's easier for its administrators. So it's very easy to go in and do a demo of Microsoft Teams and it to go down very, very well. Number four, we have the fact that Microsoft Teams is a strategic focus with Microsoft. Microsoft know that Microsoft Teams opens the door to the rest of the Microsoft 365 stack. Microsoft Teams is a converged application. When you're having a chat, you are using Exchange Online. When you are working together on a file, you're using SharePoint or OneDrive. When you're recording a Teams meetings, it used to go into Stream, it's now going into SharePoint and OneDrive. So you're using other parts of the stack by using Microsoft Teams. And if we look at the numbers for SharePoint, for example, that's gone up to 200 million monthly active users. And in a large part, that rise has been because of Microsoft Teams. So Teams is a strategic focus for Microsoft. They push it. We've probably seen adverts about it here in the UK and in other countries around the world. Last off is this idea of extensibility. Now we need to understand what this extensibility is, because that's really to do with applications. And extensibility is the software, or in this case Microsoft's team, ability to have its functionality built on or extended by others. Now this is a really, really important point, because this is really the basis for what we call Teams as a platform. Microsoft Teams is becoming a base upon which other apps, processes, and technologies are developed. Now, if we go back to when Microsoft Teams was first created, so that's 2016, it was released into GA in 2017. Teams then was a hub for collaboration and communication. It used to be called by Microsoft a chat-based workspace. It was as much to do with meetings and calling as it was to do with apps. The whole collaboration and communication was played on a lot back then, the natural successor for Skype for Business. But as time has gone on, then we're hearing about this Teams as a platform. This is something that is really now in the center of our minds and in the center of Microsoft's minds moving forward. That Teams is bringing all of the other apps together. It's a base upon which these other apps, processes, and technologies are developed. And this makes a lot of sense, right? For a number of reasons you can see here on the right-hand side. It's beginning to bring apps to where users work. So it's bringing those apps together. What it means is that users can transition easily between these apps without breaking their workflow. So they're not pinballing around. Secondly, is simplifying the way that users access their apps and for admins to distribute their apps. In other words, their kind of focus and the flow of their work is kind of built on and within Microsoft Teams. And this is especially pertinent for admins and I guess to keep the theme of build, for developers as well. This is the platform when you're building your apps or when you're applying these policies that you see later today. It makes it easier because people are consuming those apps through a singular platform. Number three is deepening interrelationships between disparate and siloed apps. This has been a big problem in IT for very many years. In other words, okay, users are having to go all different places in order to be able to use their apps. They'd have to do it on their local machine. They would have to do it through their browser. They would have to access them on virtual machines. All of those apps tended to be, what we would call siloed apps. They were tended to be apps, okay, that weren't interrelated with each other. And with that, there was a high development cost of using, for example, APIs and trying to integrate them into a centralized platform. There were many businesses that have tried to do that over the years. Second to last is filling functionality gaps within Teams and meeting real business needs. It's really important that Teams doesn't do everything by itself. It has a lot of out-of-the-box functionality, but there's a lot of things that it doesn't do. And therefore, by bringing in other applications, they very much mature and complete what it is that we're trying to do. Teams cannot fulfill the needs of, at least on its own, of every organization that needs it. Each organization that uses it, their needs are going to be unique. So having a platform where you can lock in other applications and build other applications on top of Teams, you can see now why it's going to be appealing for a lot of different types of organizations, regardless of their size or regardless of their vertical. Last but not least, it's an opportunity to create business and new revenues. So if you're in the ISV business, if you're a developer, it's a huge opportunity because 145 million people are using Microsoft Teams on a day-to-day basis. That's a huge market. Now, let's have an idea of this opportunity. You might yourselves be developing an application. There was two studies done by Forrester last year. You can see the names of those studies there down the bottom of the slide. But I wanted to pick out some statistics which I think kind of characterize that opportunity, the extent how big it actually is. And in one of those studies, it was projected that organizations using Teams as a platform for its application, either developing or consuming, there is a 393% return over 3 years of using Teams as a platform. That's saved on maintenance, on development costs, on productivity. That's all been kind of put together into an all-up number. Secondly, 50% of customers want third-party app tools available through a collaboration system, kind of solution. Users have reported back, businesses have reported back that they want to have a collaboration solution that have the apps available to hand. It makes their lives easier. It makes, as already said, IT admins work easier. Last but not least, over 45% would pay, so of the organizations that participated in this, would pay for upfront or ongoing professional services costs for ongoing app costs. In other words, if you're in managed services, if you're in that ISV space, if you're a developer, there's a massive opportunity, not just now in terms of building and installing that app, but of maintaining it on an ongoing basis. This is really compelling if you're in that space. And this is, you can see now, because Microsoft Teams is extensible, it has a big number of advocates. People are developing for Teams. People are advocating to use apps on Microsoft Teams. Microsoft are not just talking about this. This is really important. They're actually doing this today, and they're actually doing this in a big way, and they're doing it with their own applications within the Microsoft 365 stack. So here is just kind of 3 examples, because it's important. If Microsoft are pushing Teams, if they're saying it's the platform to build on, we want to get kind of confirmation that they're doing this themselves. And the first example is Microsoft Lists. If we go back to Microsoft Build last year, Microsoft Lists was announced. Now, Microsoft Lists is the evolution of SharePoint Lists, but it is now an application within the Microsoft 365 stack in itself. And when they made that announcement, Microsoft Lists was announced for Teams and as a standalone app at the same time. And that's pretty kind of, I would say, the new norm. When new apps are released, they're not just released on their own to be accessed over a web experience or in a desktop client. They're also announced for Microsoft Teams too. So modern applications are now being designed to go into Microsoft Teams at the same time as being accessed on their own. Beforehand, that never occurred. Secondly, we have Yammer. So Yammer was purchased by Microsoft kind of many years ago. It's been in the Microsoft 365 stack for some time. And one kind of recently, it was brought in as the communities app into Microsoft Teams. So what Microsoft are doing is bringing together the inner loop and the outer loop communications in one. Consequently, again, from my personal experience, and I would love to see Microsoft's numbers on this, since they've did that, since Yammer could be accessed through Microsoft Teams so that users can move between their inner loop and outer loop communications, Yammer adoption has really kind of, again, in my personal experience, gone through the roof here. I hope it has been the same for yourself. Last but not least, we have the tasks for Teams application. So this has been kind of developed over the last year. I think it was kind of went into GA. I think it was around about the January, February time. The task for team application brings together planner and to do in a new app experience within Microsoft Teams, and you can add that as a tab in a team. You can add it as a personal application on the left-hand side on the app rail. So those are just 3 examples of Microsoft either developing or building on the app experience to be used within Microsoft Teams, and that is going to continue. We've seen the further development of SharePoint, for example, becoming closer to Microsoft Teams all the time. Viva Connections is bringing that even closer together to have your modern intranet within Teams. And Microsoft, as well as integrating within Microsoft Teams, these apps are broadening the extensibility surface all of the time. So if we have a look at a few of these, we can add apps into Teams and into channels. We can add apps into chat as messaging extensions. We can have personal apps down the left-hand side attached to the app rail. We have UI components, and last but not least, that was introduced recently, so after Microsoft, between the Microsoft Ignites, we had the new extensibility surface of meetings. So you can now have apps within meetings. And you can see all the ways that they can be surfaced as, tabs, bots, extensions, connectors, webhooks. There's many ways that we can integrate apps within Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft are both doing it themselves, and all the time they're trying to figure out new places where you can use your apps. Now, how can we get started with apps today? And this really kind of finishes off the first section of this talk. First of all, we can consume our applications, so we can kind of actively begin to start using Teams as a platform simply by consuming apps inside our organization. Just this month it surpassed 900 apps that are inbuilt into the Teams app store. So if I come in kind of here within Microsoft Teams and I come down to the left hand side, there we go. Over 900 applications are available today through Microsoft applications and third party to begin for you to be able to use. But you can use applications that are not on the Teams store. For example, you can use app templates that are available on such platforms as GitHub as well. So we can start using Teams as a platform simply by consuming and starting to use those apps. But we can also build. An important part of Teams as a platform is this idea that we can build the applications ourselves. And there are different ways in order for us to do that. Again, if you register for Microsoft Build, you are going to see a lot of sessions on this idea of building applications with your own tools or tools that have been provided through things like the Power Platform. So we can go really, if we break it down into 2 routes, if we go to what we call the full code route, the professional developer route, we can really have, there's 2 major ways. You can build using your preferred tools. So you can write your app in a language such as C#. You can use the tools of your choice, such as Visual Studio. You can house that in Azure, and then you can use App Studio within Microsoft Teams to then surface that app. That's what most organizations do with their line of business applications. Alternatively, you can build using the SharePoint framework. So you can use the frameworks such as Angular, tools such as Node.js, and you can host that in SharePoint and then sync the app into Microsoft Teams. So if you're a professional developer, you've really got kind of 2 routes that you can go to get those apps into Teams. However, over the last few years, we've seen the massive rise of the Power Platform, and Power Platform is building apps with Power Apps, which is a low-code, no-code solution. So you do not have to be a professional developer. You can be what's called a citizen developer, somebody that works in an organization, hasn't got a professional background in development. But when I say that, I really don't want you to get me wrong. I don't want you to think that the Power Platform is just for citizen developers. It's really aimed at both pro and so the citizen developers would do a part in the design of those apps. The professional developers would come along and do a part of that as well. It's a new concept we'll hear about at Build called Fusion Teams, Fusion. I would really look at those sessions. But we can get together with Teams as a platform either on a consumption or a build basis, and as you can see here, that's a massive opportunity for us in our organizations. Now we kind of get to starting to discuss about the tools and app management. apps are important. You have over 900 that are integrated into Microsoft Teams. Teams can't do everything out of the box, so we're going to need to use those apps. But what I find in my experience is when talking to organizations, they really haven't thought how they're gonna manage that. What typically happens is that they assign Teams licenses to people within the organization, and then off they go. So, you know, all apps are available. All users can start to use them within the teams. IT admins do not know what apps their users are using. They don't know what apps have been turned on. And as well, people can just go off and maybe use Power Apps and upload their other apps. So for the IT admin, there's a number of challenges. You can see them here. This is not a kind of a final list. What apps are my users using? Are my apps, you know, users secure and compliant? Are my apps, my users using optimal for their role? And is my organization okay with users creating and uploading their own apps? These are things that, as IT admins, they're questions we have to ask both to our own management, but also to our own users too, or Microsoft partners and vendors if we use them. So what can we do about this? What tools have we got at our kind of disposal in order to be able to manage those apps? Well, first of all, this really starts, okay, when we talk about the management of applications, this doesn't even start at the administrator. This actually starts at the owner of the team and the owner settings. So the ability to control apps on a teams by teams basis. Now, if I go into my Teams environment and I go to a team, so here we go. I'm just going to create a new team for this organization. I'm going to create one from scratch. I'm going to call this App Management Fun. Okay, so I'm going to create that team. So here we are. It's going to take a second. There we go. It's going to ask me to go and add a user. So I'm going to add my colleague Vesku. I'm going to add him right there. Now, where do we go within the team? So you can see my team has been created with my channel. Where do I go to kind of manage apps? Well, what I do is I click the three little dots, which is more options, and then go to manage teams. Now you can see that I've literally just deployed this team. It's got us 2 members in it. And if I look here along the tabs, I've got apps, and you can see that there's already a number of apps that have been installed within the team before anyone has actually even used that team. So we have to assess straight away whether we want, as team owners, those apps or not. So for example, I might not want to use the Praise application, so I can very easily go and uninstall that app immediately. In addition, if I want to install more apps for my team, I click one button up the right-hand side, and as you will see, that will take me back to the App Store in order to be able to install my application. So the team owner needs to know that they can manage the installation and the uninstallation of their applications. They should review those pre-installed apps straight away in the team. Also, as well, straight from the off, they need to decide whether what permissions the members of those teams have in terms of being able to add and remove apps themselves. So if I go back to my team now, and I click on the 3 buttons again, okay, and I go to manage team, and I will go, instead of going to the apps, I'll go to the settings, and you can now go here to member permissions, and you can see here that we have permissions to allow the members of our team to be able to add and remove apps, or be able to upload those customized apps that they create through the Power Platform or through their line of business apps. I'm just going to go and turn them off because I don't want people in order to be able to do that. I would also recommend, if you're going to turn that off, turning off connectors and tabs and other associated functionalities to do with apps. For example, if I install an app and I add it as a tab into the team, I do not want people to remove that tab because I want them to always have access to the app through that tab in the team. So, you know, first of all, we need to kind of install the apps we want, uninstall any kind of pre-installed apps. We then need to set our permissions. We also need to be able to check the apps that we're installing. So for example, I come to the App Store, I search for an app that I want to install within my team. So let's just take one such as Poly here. What you find is that most people will not read any of this. They will just say, oh, I want to use that app, and click add. And that's really the wrong thing in order to be able to do. We want to come down to this section, okay, and we want to see what the app, kind of actually has permissions to. Because we might not be comfortable, or it might not be our company policy. So here we go. Poly can access my profile information, such as my name, email address, contact information from the team, okay, chat meetings, that's meeting name, channel list, and the roster, okay, including the team or the chat member's name and email address. So, for example, is your organization happy that a third-party application, and hence a third party, is going to have access, okay, to the chat, members' names, and their email address, particularly if there's people within your team, such as your CEO or CFO? Are you happy with that? So as a team owner, they need to be educated in order to know what the company's policy is on this, if they've got access to install apps. Even more importantly is the security information of the apps, because this is very kind of rarely considered by team owners within organizations. So if, for example, I'm just gonna click on this page. In Microsoft Docs, you will have the app and security and compliance information for all of the apps within Microsoft Teams. Now, I'm just going to kind of scroll down. I'm going to select on Poly, and I'm going to go to this tab here, security and compliance. Okay. So, for example, let's have a look at the security and compliance. What does, or how does that app meet security and compliance regulations? Where is the data stored? The data center here for Poly is the US. My organization might not allow my org to be able to store data, any company data, in the US. Therefore, I shouldn't be allowing the organization, and I shouldn't be installing this application. For many, they can, but for some, they're in highly compliant environments. So understanding where this security information is really, really quite important. So we need to really empower owners every single time they install these applications, if they've got the ability to do so, to be able to think about these things. Now we move on to the admin. Owners have some responsibility, but admins have the kind of the big amount of responsibility, because they've got access to what's called the Teams Admin Center. And inside the Teams Admin Center are our tools for managing our apps. Now we're going to start looking at these. Okay, we're going to look at this section called Manage Apps. And Manage Apps, okay, is about the app settings really across the whole organization. So if I click on Manage Apps here, okay, I'm just going to go back to it so it actually loads up the apps rather than not returning anything. So here we go. It's just loading the data. I'm good. I was thinking that I might have to reload the page. You can see all of the lists of the applications that are here in Microsoft Teams. Now, one of the first things that we can do is we can review these applications in order to enable or disable them. So I've almost got an on-off button for the application. If I do not want that application used within Microsoft Teams at all as the administrator, I can do that. So let me just click on this application here called One-on-One Hub. I'm going to kind of review this. I might look at their privacy policy or their terms of use. I'll look at their website and think, is that an application that I want to use? No. So all I will need to do is I can select it. So just waiting for that. Just select it and then click block. Okay. You are blocking this app. If you block it, it won't be available for users in Teams. I'm happy with that. And it's really recommended that the admins go through these apps and really kind of, if you block them, then no user in your organization, will be able to use that app whatsoever. So this is a really good way for saying, no, I don't want to use this app. In addition here, you've also got the ability, okay, to install an app in a team. So let's say that if I've got developers in my organization and I want to, they're developing an application, let's say on the Power Platform, we've got the ability to upload them here. So I click upload. I would select a file. Okay. Now I'm going to go to a folder. Okay. Here, and you can see that I've got some Power Apps that have already been created. I'm going to literally click on the button and it'll wait for 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, it'll say I can't upload this app because I've already uploaded it before, but that's the way that you would upload a Power App. And you can see that there is the Power App that I've already uploaded. Once I've uploaded it, I can make sure that it's published, that it's allowed, and that will then begin appearing within my Microsoft Teams environment. I've also got the ability to update it. So if I've got a new version of the app, I would take a new package and I would update it over the top, or I can delete it. So the manage apps is all really kind of, I would say, a master set of controls about whether you really want that app inside your Teams environment or not. We also, up the top right-hand side here, have the org-wide app settings. And that's all about whether your users, okay, can work with third-party apps, or they can work with custom apps. Again, they're master buttons. So if you do not want to work with Power Apps or line of business applications whatsoever, you would, for example, turn off the slider and then save that. Then no one in your organization would be able to interact with them. So as an admin, you really have the kind of the final say through the org-wide app settings of saying yes or no to applications within inside your environment. Next, you have what we call the app permission policy. So assuming that somebody within your organization is going to use the apps, you can set exactly who has access to those apps within Microsoft Teams. Now, the app permission policies, let's go down back into my environment. Here are the permission policies. You really have two types. You have the global org-wide default, but you can create your own custom policies. Now, what does that mean? The global default policy is applied to users who have just been assigned a license. Every kind of individual or every user within inside an environment needs to have a policy. They cannot not have a policy. And when you first set up Teams, Microsoft gives them the global org-wide default policy. That's the first policy that will apply to them. Now let's have a look at this within inside the Teams environment. So if I click on the global org-wide default, that's saying with Microsoft apps, third-party apps, and custom apps, allow all apps by default. And this is a big problem for organizations because you will look inside their Teams environment and probably 8 out of 10 at this current time will allow their users access to all of those applications. And considering they do not block them in the managed apps section, that usually means that users have carte blanche to really come into Microsoft Teams. They click on their apps, and what they see is they see all of these applications. It's not really a user's fault if these apps are kind of available for them to say, this looks like a good app, I want to use it, I'm going to click and go ahead. That responsibility really falls to the organization and the administrators for having to actually have had to review this beforehand. So back inside my permissions policies, what choices do I have if I do not want to allow all the applications? Well, I've got allow specific apps and block all others. So I can only say, look, you can have access to these specific apps. I can decide to block specific apps and allow all others. So if I kind of say, look, I don't want this, or I could block all applications completely. So just to give an example, I might say, look, I'm buying this service off Microsoft, so I'm absolutely going to allow all apps. I've got third-party apps, okay, and I want to allow specific apps and block all others. So for example, I only want to give access to Poly because I know my users are using it. I'm going to click allow. And then in terms of custom apps, I'm going to block this kind of completely. And then what you would do is that you would save that global org-wide default, and it would probably apply to most of your users. But let's say that you wanted different sets of users to have different policies. We can just as easily create custom policies. So here is my custom policy, or I call it custom app policy, make it a little bit more sense. And I'm going to say in this circumstance, okay, I'm going to allow all Microsoft apps I'm going to allow specific apps. So one of those apps, again, we'll say Poly. And I'm going to block those custom apps. And then I'm going to save it. Here we go. There's my custom app policy that's created. I'm going to go to the users. I'm going to pick a user. So I'm going to pick Carolina, for example. I'm going to go to policies. I can see what her app permission policy is. She's still on the global. Well, I'm going to edit that. I'm going to then, in the app permission policies, change her to my custom app policy, which I just created, and apply. And a couple of hours time, that is then going to apply. So app permission policies are kind of really, really important, especially if you haven't blocked specific applications, because you're setting what applications users can use. And once you've set that app permission policy, that's going to change the view inside of the apps. When that user logs in, what Carolina is going to see, she's going to see the Microsoft app, she's going to see Poly, and then she's going to see nothing else. That's her choice. And that really is a more efficient way of having management of applications, and it becomes much simpler for the user because they know what they can use and what they can't. Last of all, okay, you have app setup policies. So app setup policies customizes the app experience for your users, in particular the app bar down the left-hand side of Teams and the app bar within the mobile client. So let's just go and see where that is. You can see down here. Okay, what can you see? You can see all the default apps. So for example, activity, chat, Teams, calendar, calls, and files. You can see I've got the new Viva Connections app. So if I just kind of pull this up, it might take a second or two, hopefully to there we go. It's just loading up. Perfect. And then I've also got some other apps that I've pinned by myself down the left-hand rail. This is a kind of an optimized experience for myself. I'm giving myself access to the apps that I need to use every single day. It makes my job more efficient. It gives me a better experience of Microsoft Teams. Now, inside, as the administrator, we can create that experience for our users by going to setup policies. And again, like the permission policies we just discussed, there is the global org-wide default, and there is custom policies there as well. So I'm just going to click on the global org-wide default to see what this looks like. This is what it looks like. I've got the ability to set whether my users can upload custom apps. So if they're creating Power Apps or they're building their own line of business applications, I can actually stop or allow this at the user level. I can also allow them to be able to pin those apps on the app bar. So what does that pinning actually look like for people who may not have done this? You just simply click the three buttons, you find an app on here, you click the left-hand button, and then you would pin or unpin it to the app route. So I've got the ability to control that too. Next, I've got the ability to pre-install apps. I then have the ability to set the actual apps pinned to the app rail. And you can see here down the bottom, right, that it's not just the defaults. I've put Viva Connections in there. I've put Power Apps in there. I'm just going to go and add another one now. Okay, so I think I'm going to add Power Automate as well. There we go. And then I save that. Now this is the global default policy. So that's going to kind of roll out to all of my users within the next few hours. And when they open up Microsoft Teams, this is exactly what it's going to look like down the left-hand side on their app route. Now, like permission policies, you have the global org-wide default. You can set up custom. So for example, let's say, for example, that I have developers. So this could be a developer app route. I'm going to allow them, absolutely allow them to upload custom apps. They can pin whatever they like. I'm not going to worry about installing them because I don't want to be kind of too prescriptive. But instead of kind of Power, in addition to Power Apps and Power Automate, for example, you know, I could have something like GitHub. Okay, I could then have something like Jira. You know, much more tailored towards those users than my general users. And once I've gone and kind of saved that. So you can see, look, developer app row, I can do exactly the same thing. I can click on my users. Let's say that Marco here is a developer within inside my organization. I go to policies. I can then go to the app setup policy. Okay, so you can see that he's already got one applied here. And I'm going to change that to the developer app row. So when Marco logs in a couple of hours time, he's going to see what we need him to see. So we're distributing those applications in a much more efficient way than we were doing previously. Now, in addition to the kind of the manage apps, the permission policies and the setup policies, we also need to understand how we can control custom app installs. So if we are developing our applications via Power Apps or via low code, no code, or whether we're using App Studio in order to create a manifest to put on our line of business application, then we need, as an admin, to decide how and who will have the ability to be able to install it on behalf of the organization. And as you will see, okay, this is not always straightforward. This is a combination of the org settings in Manage Apps, the team settings, so the owners of the team, and the user control through the app setup policy. Some things to remember here, there is a chart there on the right-hand side that I'm just going to talk about this a second so you can get a screenshot of. This is in docs.com. The org, so in the manage apps, so where we saw this was under manage apps, under the org-wide settings. It's important to realize that it was a master control within that setting. So the custom apps, if that is off, then none of your users inside your environment will be able to upload their own Power Apps or upload their line of business applications. That just will be possible. They won't even be able to interact with them. So really, if you do plan to use Power Apps or line of business applications, that org, that master switch needs to be on within managed apps. Secondly, with the team need, the owners of the team need to determine whether they want to allow those applications. So if I go back to my team, okay, and I go back to the team that I created right at the start, and I go to manage teams, and then I go to settings, and then I go to member permissions, I have to decide about whether I allow people to be able to kind of use apps that they've uploaded within Teams. I might just want to make a developer an owner of a team in consequence. Last but not least, it's all about the app setup policy. So we saw this. So if I come back to my Teams Admin Center, I'm going to just come out of here, and then I go to the setup policies, and I'm just going to click on the developer app row. Whether individuals can upload Power Apps or line of business applications to the environment is very much dependent upon the app setup policy. So if that's turned on, the user can. If it's turned off, then the user can't. So you might want to have different app setup policies, because you might want to give your developers the ability to do this, but most other users within the Teams environment, you don't want them to do this. If you're in a highly regulated environment, you might not even allow developers to do this. They might pass on the package that has been created, the zip file that you saw me try to upload earlier, pass on to the admin so that you can come in here to the Teams Admin Center and then upload the zip file through here. So that's very much, but you need to kind of understand this in terms of the management. Now, kind of winding up, it's getting to that time. There are some other considerations that we need to have in apps. Number one, we need to understand how we distribute those apps. So you saw me in that demonstration directly assign, okay, an app policy to a user, okay. Now, there are other ways to assign. You can bulk assign, you can do group policy, you can do policy packages. Group policy with app permissions and app setup, you can only do through PowerShell. So you have to think about the ways. If you've got a small organization, then you're probably going to direct assign. If you've got a massive one of many thousand users, you're probably going to use it through something like policy packages. And what's important is that we can now do custom policy packages within inside the Teams environment. So here I am, policy packages. Okay, I can add and now create my own custom policy package, which is really, really cool. And there we go. Look, there's our app setup policy, which we can do within that. Secondly, it's about the security. So it's not just about using applications, it's all about how people get to those applications. So when it comes to Teams, we need to understand about things like identity, about multi-factor authentication, about conditional access, about Authenticator, potentially things such as Azure AD identity protection. We also need to understand about things like Intune and endpoint management and having app protection policies. Because if you've got critical apps that are being accessed through Microsoft Teams, and you're in a bring your own device environment, then you're going to want to ensure that you at least have some app protection policies down upon the apps themselves if you can't control the mobile devices. Third of all, we have to think about standardization, about standardizing those apps across the organization, because we don't ideally want to have so many policies that it becomes very difficult for us in order to be able to manage. On the one hand, we have Teams templates. So if I come here with inside Teams and I have the Teams templates, I have a number of templates that have been prepackaged from Microsoft. Now inside, okay, those templates, you have the ability to add channels and you have the ability to add apps. So we have to think about, are we going to use a Teams template? So if we don't want users, or we're veering away from creating from scratch, what apps are we going to include in the templates that are going to be there when we begin to create our teams? On the other hand, when we talk about standardization, it's about using the apps that are within Teams and not duplicating applications or using them outside of Teams. And I can't recommend enough cloud app security. Okay. Cloud app security is really great. You can use it if you're in a corporate environment. You can use the traffic logs on the firewall. If you're in a decentralized environment, so people at home, you can use Defender for Endpoint on the machines to feed back and see what apps your users are using, because we want them to use the correct apps within Microsoft Teams, you know, and what's going to undermine that? People using, for example, Dropbox or Box on their local machine, just giving an example. Now, I often get asked, how do people can see the apps that users are actually using? If I walk into a kind of a consultancy and I need to see what apps users are using, come down, okay, to the usage reports inside analytics and reports and have a look at the apps usage, and you can see up to 90 days and run that report. And you can see here right down the bottom of the apps that I've used inside my environment. It's not just Microsoft apps, it's also, there we go. So that's a Power App. That's one of the new Dataverse for Teams Power Apps. I've got insights, lists, you know, a lot of Microsoft, but third-party apps are also supported. You can't go as far as dig into who the users actually are, but it will start you out to see that that could be one of the bases for developing your app permission and your app setup policies. If you see really high usage, maybe it should be on the app row. Last of all, if you've got developers with inside your environments, you know, even if you're an IT admin and you're not involved in a development, still try to familiarize yourselves and understand the tools for building, understand how you build a Power App, understanding what App Studio is and how your developers package those line of business applications, understand what Fluent is and how developers will use that to create a better experience for your users. Because the more you can understand about building, the better you can ultimately manage and give the correct permissions to people who need to use it. You may not want the job as an IT admin to be able to upload the apps and maintain them for what your developers develop. You might give them the permissions that they can upload, and all I have to do is click the button and approve in the Teams Admin Center. They're probably better to make that decision than I am as an IT admin. So in terms of what more, you know, kind of learning that we can take after this, user voice. Now, user voice is going away this year at some point. I think a lot of people have seen that on social media. There'll be a replacement for it, but until that time, it is still active. So vote on the functionality you want to see. Here are a couple that I've kind of voted on. An enhanced Teams apps usage report. I want to see more users. I want to see exactly what users, so I can contact them and discuss them and assess how necessary apps are within the environment. Manage app access via group membership. So the app permissions, the app setup policy do not work via group membership at this moment in time, or the ability to hide the app store completely, for specific users. If we think of people that we're hiring for a temporary period of time, I really don't want them engaged in installing apps into my environment. Some of the resources that you can have: microsoftdocs.com, Microsoft Learn. If you're a Microsoft partner, I can't recommend enough getting your hands on the CDX platform, which is demos.microsoft.com. You'll be able to spin up an E5 environment, get hands-on with everything you've seen here without any knock-on to your production environment or having to pay out for a demo environment. And of course, the public video platform, so YouTube, there's lots of information on there that can build upon this subject. And of course, register for Microsoft Build today. Returning to the outcomes, we broke this down into 3 parts: the why, the how, and the considerations and resources. We looked at why app management is necessary, because Teams as a platform, there are more and more apps being installed inside our environment. The opportunity is huge, so it's going to grow exponentially. How? We looked at managing apps. We looked at how owners can do it in Teams, app permission policies, app setup policies, and we finally kind of rounded things off on the considerations and resources. This was a level 200 intermediate session. Okay, the scope focused purely on the Teams app. I wanted to get as much information about apps. It's app fundamentals after all, but a caveat is that it's rapidly changing all the time. There'll be new functionality, I will guarantee you, this year, after Build, after Inspire. But here we go. There is the link to the Microsoft Learn session. So if you want to take a screenshot of this, you absolutely can do now. So I'll just wait a minute. And then I want to thank you very much for attending today. It's been brilliant for you all. I love speaking at the Reactor. I hope it's been a good session for you all. You can contact me over email, chris.hoard@vuzion.cloud. I've got Twitter and LinkedIn. You can go and have a look at my site at microsoft365pro.co.uk. I do a lot of blogging. I've just released on a walkthrough end-to-end of Viva Connections. I've got lots more to write on in the coming months because I've been so busy at conferences. And as you can see there on the right-hand side, I've got a lot of other talks coming up. So please feel free to drop in and say hello. There's a few new ones on there as well. Okay, so I'd like to thank you. And do we have any questions, Emma, from today? Or if anyone want to come off mute and ask a question at all?
Great. Yeah, we do actually have a few questions, Chris, and maybe we have a couple of minutes to go through some of those.
Absolutely.
Great. So I think you already kind of mentioned this just in the last few slides, just on learning resources. But Andrew asked if there's any tips or learning paths to keep an eye on current and new or future features for Teams. So for IT Pro Plus end user, and what to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you will kind of find sections within Microsoft Learn to do with app management for Microsoft Teams. But at this moment in time, it's not the most, I would say, either kind of technical or clear sub. So, I mean, you do, as an IT Pro admin, of course, it's very, very important for you to know it. But what I would say is that it's relatively small and containable. The majority of the fundamental stuff is in here. Some of the stuff you might want to read on kind of past this was in the considerations, but also stuff like app resource specific consent. That's probably quite important to touch on. Also as well, I would say get into the Dataverse for Teams applications. So these are applications such as milestones, bulletins, employee ideas. They're applications that you can go and build on and develop yourself. And it's important that if you begin installing them inside your environment, the degree to which you can customize them, but also the degree to which you can secure them. So for example, when you deploy bulletins or you deploy employee ideas, they go into Dataverse from Teams. How do you actually secure them in their environments? How do you do things like table security? I think that's quite important. You've also got app customization. That is coming. Well, it's here with apps such as Praise, but it'll be rolled out to a lot of other applications within the stack. The most important thing that I think out of everything is having the security and compliance details and the attestation within the Teams admin center, knowing that you can see as an IT admin straight away that that app is okay for our environment or not, to be able to make the decision, because that's the kind of the real, I would say, the real danger here is that you do not kind of block any of those apps. You haven't done any app permission policies. A user who's in a different part of the organization, you may never have met them, they may have kind of started last week, they think that they're helping the organization, they go and put that app in, they start putting corporate data into it, and then you run into a situation where you've got your data that's put in a non-compliant geographical area, and you've got to go and you don't know about this until such a time where somebody accidentally stumbles over it, or you're infringed on some kind of regulation. So I think personally, it's on docs.com. It needs to be in the Teams admin center, and it's coming at some point. It was announced at Ignite, but it is not quite here yet. So I think for apps, that is the big thing. It's having that attestation and security and compliance information in the panel. Hopefully that answers your question.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. Just a couple more that we'll try and get through. So Kumar asked, what do you mean by inner loop and outer loop communication?
Absolutely. So inner loop and outer loop communication is being defined by Microsoft as the type of communication and the app that you kind of use in order to be able to facilitate that. So to give you a kind of real world example, inner loop means within your team, and the application that's defined as inner loop communications is Microsoft Teams. So you would build your team, you would have kind of quick communications like instant messages, but the communication would be within your immediate team, hence the inner loop. The outer loop communications are communications that are really broadcast across your entire organization. And of course, there are, outside of the team, there's a whole organization. Your team could be 8 or 9 people, but the whole organization could be, for example, 1,000 or 2,000. And Teams is not always the best medium in order to be able to do that. So Microsoft, when talking about outer loop communications, tends to associate Yammer with that. So and it's important because these different types of communications, okay, kind of really determine what is the right app and which is not. You have email, for example, that's different again, that's targeted communications. So I wouldn't kind of write in Teams in my inner loop communication like I would do in an email. And of course I wouldn't put long messages to the outer loop when updating my whole organization. So there's a very kind of a slide that's used at a lot of Microsoft conferences that show this inner loop, outer loop communication. What I can do is I can pass it on to Emma and she can put it into the I guess the meetup group or something to or if you provide us with your with any details or reach out to us, then I'm happy to provide that to you myself.
Great stuff, thanks, Chris. And yeah, we can definitely share that out on Meetup or on the check-in page as well that I mentioned in the beginning. So we'll just take one more question because I know we're running a bit over time. So next question that came through was from Mark asking, how do you increase the number of apps, increase app visibility?
That's interesting. I mean, how do you increase accessibility? Is that in terms of how many apps that we can access, or is that accessibility in terms of making, is that to people, for example, with disabilities? In what context?
It's increase app visibility. So maybe
increase app visibility in terms of what people are using. Okay, sorry, I thought you said accessibility as opposed to visibility. Well, I think that comes back here, to, I would say it's a mix, okay? In terms of the apps you're using in Teams, you've got the usage report, the app usage report, and it's pretty thorough. So that should report upon the apps that you're using within Microsoft Teams over a period of 7, 30, and 90 days. So I'd say that's pretty effective in pinpointing what your users are using. Before this report, you had no idea. I would say combine this with cloud app security. and know, kind of do what's called a cloud app discovery. So find out what users are on your machines, because not only do you want to find out what they're using or what's being used within Microsoft Teams, you want to compare what's being used in Microsoft Teams with all other applications that your users are using. Because they could be using, for example, applications for which they didn't know were in Teams or integratable within Teams, and they're using them outside, either on their local machines or through their browsers or through somewhere else, like a virtual machine. So I would use the usage report together with Cloud App Security to try and get that snapshot, that look at what your users are using. As said, I want to see more detail myself. I want to see exactly what users are using what. That's the kind of granularity that I want to get to. Whether that comes in sooner or later, I don't know. I haven't heard of anything personally, but that's what I'd like to see on any kind of roadmap.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. We will wrap it up there. But as you mentioned, if there are follow-up questions, people can reach out to you. So your contact information is on the screen there, which is great. So Chris, thanks so much for such an excellent session, and the best of luck with Bill today in your session. And thank you everyone for attending today, for your questions throughout as well. As I mentioned, the session was recorded and it will go onto the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel by the end of the week. So the link is in the chat there as well.
It's a pleasure. Thank you ever so much for having me, and hopefully I'll see you in a couple of months' time. I've quite liked becoming a bit of a resident of the Reactor, and hopefully I'll continue this year.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to having you back soon.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much.
Right. Thanks, Chris.